Or is my low sex drive because of maybe some hormonal issues that I might have going on? We have to be really careful that our sobriety doesn't get the blame for all of the bad things that we think are bad that are happening in our life.
You were twisting through seven. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Soberful podcast. I am here with Cindi Roberts. Hi Cindi.
Hello, nice to be here.
Cindi is the sober sexpert. So we're going to be talking about some adult stuff today. So if you're listening to this, you just want to be aware that this is an 18 plus conversation. Cindi is a certified recovery coach and sexual health educator and has you've been working in this area for what, 25 years?
A little bit over, actually, yes. So almost 28 now.
So, okay. So you have a real extensive background. You have a master's degree in pub. So this is really interesting. So Cindi and I met at Chicago at the She Recovers event, which you were doing a presentation, right?
I was on a panel with 3 other individuals talking about recovery and sobriety and recovery. So yes, and it was wonderful.
Interesting. So yeah, it was great to connect with you. And I just thought, I think that we should get Cindi on, and there's lots of things we can talk about.
Yes.
Where do we start? So I'm British and we're all a bit like, oh gosh. It's such an important subject. First, how did you get into it?
I do get that question a lot, especially I have 2 children. They're adults now. But when they were little, I used to get that question a lot because I talked about sex for a living. I actually sold sex toys for 14 years. And so I was the topic among the PTA moms for sure. So it is a question I have gotten a lot. I was working on my undergraduate degree, and I really enjoyed the topics of health and anything in women's health. And I was intrigued by it. And then I took a class on human sexuality, and I loved the reaction from the people and the students, the professors that were having a hard time talking about certain things. And it didn't faze me at all. It actually was like super exciting. Like, yes, let's talk about these things. And so I started to pursue it a little bit more. And then when I decided to go and work on my master's degree, I wanted to focus on sexual health. And so it was nice because it allowed me to do some focused research, but still in the field of public health. So I was like working on smoking cessation. But at the time, this was the mid-90s. So it was also during the AIDS epidemic. And so a lot of the work I did was working with the HIV positive community. And again, there was such a stigma. This was Houston, Texas. So there was just a big stigma at the time of people that were living with HIV and AIDS. And so I felt compassion for it. I felt like there was just so many things that people needed to know more about. And I started teaching the college level classes on human sexuality. And I loved the feedback. I loved watching people's faces wanting to know more because they couldn't have these conversations. They weren't having these conversations. And if they were, it was with their friends and it was all misinformation. So that's how I started my interest in the sexuality field. And it just grew from there. I still stayed in public health after that, different areas of public health, but I just felt drawn to stay in sexual health.
I feel like that's it. It's something that's just got to appeal to a certain kind of person because I'm like, oh my God, like, ooh.
Right.
But we need people like you and don't find this intimidating. Okay, so what are the hot topics that women want to know about in this area?
Well, it's interesting because, the hot topics that were happening before sobriety. So I'm 7 years sober, and because I worked so long in this industry before, and again, like I said earlier, I sold sex toys. So what I did was a lot of presentations to women, and they were blown away. They didn't understand how to use these, how to incorporate these, what's wrong. There was a lot of personal ownership of my sex life is not good. It's my fault. What can I do to fix it? So there's a lot of self-blame and a lot of just pointing the fingers at themselves and feeling inadequate and that they didn't know things. So what was interesting to me is as I entered the recovery field, I noticed some of the same topics. It was a lot of self-blame. It was, I used to use alcohol to suppress all of these feelings. I might feel differently now. So to me, I feel a lot of that self-blame and that shame still continues inside recovery and outside recovery as well. So it's really about that empowerment and that self-confidence. And, you can't mess it up. But let's start putting yourself first. So that's what I feel like has kind of been like a resonating theme throughout the entire, for me, for women, throughout the entire time.
There's a complicated relationship there, isn't there, with
Yeah.
alcohol and women and sex? I mean, I know so many of my clients, their first sexual experience, they were drunk. And a lot of their sexual behavior was under the influence and was not perhaps roads they would go down if they had been sober. It's complicated.
It is complicated. It is complicated. And what's interesting for me, a little bit of my background, since I made such a name for myself and worked really hard on my education and my practice, and I was drinking. I was drinking in my sexual relationships like this. I just was, because that's what we did. That's what moms did. I was a busy stay-at-home mom running a $1 million business, and that's how I relaxed at night. That's how all my friends did. And so for me to really kind of, when I went through recovery and stopped drinking, it was a very, very difficult thing to, admit to my partner and say, hey, like, I've actually never really had sex without a glass of wine or two, because that wasn't the norm. That's not the way it's just not the way I lived my life. Like, and none of my friends did either, from what I knew. And so it was just, so I feel like through the recovery process, that is something that, I started to become aware of as well. Like, well, if I'm feeling this and I'm super comfortable talking about sex, but I'm struggling. I am 1 month sober and I don't know how to do this without alcohol. Like, I know how to do it, but I don't know how to enjoy it. I don't know how to let my guard down. I don't know how to be completely naked. I don't know how to do these things without having, what I thought was a social lubricant.
So let's go there, I think, because I think that is something that I think men and women struggle with. But
For
let's
sure.
say with women is I when I got sober at 27, I was very scared of having sex sober. It was really terrifying, really terrifying.
Yeah.
And I think that's very common. Do you find?
Absolutely. When I am in any online forum or community groups where there's support groups for people in recovery, for me, that's the question that everyone's afraid to ask. But
Yeah.
once someone asks that question, the amount of feedback that person gets, and it's not just so much, this is what I would do. I would try doing this. It is, oh my gosh, I feel the same way. Me too.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I went through this as well. And so I really feel like it's almost like we need that affirmation from other people. Like, it's not just you, it's all of us collectively. And let's have that conversation, because we talk about so many other things in recovery, whatever your recovery journey is, we talk about all these other things, but we don't necessarily get to this nitty gritty, like the sex piece. How do I be intimate with my partner now? How do I let that guard down? What if I don't like my partner anymore? What if I'm not attracted to him or her? What if I'm starting to have feelings for someone of the opposite gender? So I think it's kind of those conversations that kind of start making people a little bit more aware, because they're not not diminishing it with anything any longer.
Yeah. I think everyone makes assumptions that it's almost like I did this. I do it with a lot of things. I think we all do. I just think everyone else is fine.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
Yeah.
I'm the only one who's like terrified of having sex sober, but you're all fine. So when someone says it, it's a collective like, oh, I'm so glad somebody said that. Right. I
Sure.
want to say it's really, really. So what advice do you give to women who feel like that?
Well, first of all, I let them know that they're not alone, that there are
Yeah.
so many people that feel like this. And I think the other thing is just, this is new. It's almost like a new relationship. I hear that a lot. Like, it feels like I'm with him for the first time, or I'm with her for the first time. And so it's being open to those conversations and communicating if you are in a relationship. Now, obviously, if you're on the dating scene, totally different story. But if you're in a relationship, I feel like communication is, I mean, we could say that about anything, right, Veronica? Like, it's just, communication's key. But really, when you're in that sobriety journey and you're in those first couple of months, it's important to have that conversation with your partner, just to let them know, like, I'm struggling. Like, I am not used to this. This feels a little bit uncomfortable, or it feels a lot uncomfortable. I need you to know that this isn't about you.
Mm.
And sometimes just letting that person off the hook a little bit, I know it sounds cliche, but just letting them know that you're struggling and you just need a little bit of grace and a little bit of patience to help find yourself and to help find what feels good to you. So that's number one that I would recommend to anyone. And then after that, it's really about kind of digging deep and seeing what feels good to you. There's a lot of people who've never orgasmed outside of alcohol, like
Mm.
or any substances. They've never done it, or they've done it very little. So sometimes it's just, again, focusing on you by yourself, not putting the pressure on your partner or while you're dating. It's just being intimate with yourself and really figuring out what it is that you like. Because many times when we're drinking, we don't take that time to do that. We're just like, fast, fast, let's go. And I just encourage women to really kind of spend that time with themselves and like see what feels good, experience what feels good.
And what about women who are single? I mean, and typically, if alcohol is your drug of choice, typically people tend to get sober older. Like getting sober in your 20s is fairly unusual. I think people get sober younger because they've used drugs as well, and drugs just finish you off pretty quickly. But like my age group tends to be 40 plus, and it's like, I mean, my marriage is wonderful and healthy, and I can't imagine being like the other day someone said to me, I thought, I can't imagine dating again,
Yeah.
like in my 50s, like um I mean, that's terrifying, isn't it? How is it for the different age groups?
Well, I think there's a couple of things going on. So when it's older, so I'm 51 and I know that, and I went through a divorce 13 years ago. And so,
Oh.
there was that whole dynamic of, seeing dating and what's that going to look like. But I think specifically for the age group in the 20s and the 30s, I just had this conversation with my daughter is a junior in Washington, and she invited me to speak to one of her groups about sobriety and about not drinking. And I'm thinking to myself, like, these are young women. They're 18 to 22. And they asked me specific questions about sex. And I'm like,
Mm.
wait a second. This topic, I thought we were talking about like, don't drink, like drinking's not good. Like it was more that, but they wanted to know, like, why do people drink when they're wanting to have sex? And they really had a lot more specific questions. And so that
Mm.
it really opened my eyes to, like, I commend that generation because they are trying to actively make these decisions of not drinking as much. I think there is a larger sober curious movement in the 20 somethings. They're seeing what happened to their parents. They're seeing how it has affected their family. At my age, I lost my mom to alcohol as well, but it wasn't enough to like make me stop immediately. Like nobody talked about their family history of alcoholism. Nobody talked about the crazy uncle or my mom. Like nobody would talk about those things. But I feel like this younger generation is. And so by doing that, I think that they're having those conversations more about their own sexuality and how drugs and alcohol can affect that. So as far as like dating, it's something new that they're experiencing. I know a lot of early 20 somethings that are like, I don't know how to do this, but I think it's becoming more socially acceptable. And it'll be interesting to see how that shifts, if that does shift for them. But I
Mm.
don't think it will. I just think that they're doing more of the work. I really do.
Yeah, I mean, but so what about for older women? We all have, I mean, the hang-ups about our bodies, a lot of us
Yeah.
have born children. What are you hearing from the 50 plus women who are going back into the dating pool?
Their fears are more about, how do I do this sober? How do I do
Right.
it? Whereas I feel like the younger ones are like, I don't know how to do it sober, but I think I can do it. Like I feel confident enough to be able to do it. It's the ones who have been doing it for so long that I think that it's harder to rewire their brain and kind of thinking that I am beautiful, I am sexy, I can do this, and thinking that not everybody is out to get them or that everybody knows that they don't drink, especially if you're, entering dating apps too. And like, do I put that on there? Do I not put that on there? I'm not really sure. Is that going to scare somebody off? And again, I think it comes back to that
Yeah.
confidence, Veronica. It really is like, this is who I am. This is what the life that I have chosen now. Like I've worked
Yeah.
through my addiction. However you phrase that to yourself, this is who I am. And so I'm going to enter the dating field knowing this, feeling confident in it, And if the person doesn't match up with me because of this, or I get weird feelings on date number 2 because they're pressuring me, I am, 58 years old and, screw that, I'm out, next. And I know that sounds pretty easy to say, but I think it really kind of boils down to that. I can do that. And then on top of it, we're dealing with our own, whether it's perimenopause, menopause, like we're dealing with those issues on top of all of this new sobriety that you might have. And so it's really kind of deciding, am I blaming my sobriety for my lower sex drive? Or is my low sex drive because of maybe some hormonal issues that I might have going on? I might need to talk to my doctor about this. So I think we have to be really careful that our sobriety doesn't get the blame for all of the bad things that we think are bad that are happening in our life.
I think that's what I hear from a lot of my clients, and I've seen people fall in that it's just too scary, or
Yeah.
they met someone they like that just had the expectation of wanting to have sharing a bottle of wine, and you have to lead with it right off the bat that you don't drink, because if someone has a problem with that, they're not the person for you. And I've seen lots of women compromise themselves to be wanted, and we all, having a loving partner is wonderful. Yeah, I've seen that. No, can I ask you a question? Do you think
Sure.
it's the same for gay women as it is for straight women, or do you just think it's in the dating community?
I think there's similar issues. I certainly don't want to speak on behalf of them because I have enough friends that have told me like, oh my God, like this is scary. Like this is, so I do feel like there's a lot of similarities for sure. But for what I have witnessed in like that panel with She Recovers, I learned a lot by, knowing that there is for me, my observations, there's a little bit higher level of self-confidence among women in that community, in the field, in recovery. I felt like it. I felt more confident just in conversation with them. So I feel like there are a lot of similarities, but they have had to probably, in my opinion, have overcome a little bit where they've dealt with some stigma, they've dealt with some prejudices. And so for them, their field of experience is different than mine. And so I feel like they may be a little bit more capable of handling some of that, or not that it makes it easier, but they have a little bit built up defense, they've had to like work through themselves. And so, and I often find women in new recovery are even questioning their own sexuality. They've been with a male partner for 20 something years. And now I might be having feelings for someone else. And it's one, not my husband. And two, it may not be a man. And so what does this mean for me? Or I feel like I like the attention of multiple partners. And so there's a lot of even conversation about that happening right now. Like maybe maybe I'm not connected to my partner as much now. Maybe I might like to try this. And so I feel like there's a little bit more exploration that happens in recovery and sobriety.
Yeah, I've had some clients have some wonderful sexual awakenings in middle age and in sobriety, and had
celebrate that.
same-sex partners, and it's really liberated them, and it's been wonderful.
Yeah, that's what I think. Veronica, it's a beautiful thing to me. Like, let's celebrate that. If it's going to look different for you, instead of, placing this shame, like, oh my gosh, like she now likes this gender and doesn't like this gender anymore, or she just left her marriage of 20 something years because she found that she's now feels liberated. Can we learn to celebrate that and support the women around us? It may not be our personal choice, but how can we celebrate and support them in the best way that we can, and help them remain sober through this? Because that's a huge life change. As you know, when you go through life changes, and that's when your sobriety is challenged. And that is when you have to learn to really focus on, sometimes just focus on that day to day, minute to minute. And so when you're going through these big shifts, what if we can just really support each other through that?
What other hot topics do you get when you are speaking to a bunch of sober women? So we had the one about like, oh my God, my I'm terrified of having sex for the first time. What else comes up consistently? Because there must.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of concern about desire and not wanting it and
Hmm.
the frequency
Hmm.
of doing it. So there's, I think
Hmm.
first there's this fear of, I don't know how to do it. And your body still, it's like, it sounds so cliche, but it is, it's riding a bike, right? Like your body will still remember
It's
how
true.
to do it,
It's
right?
true.
I know, especially if it's in a heteronormative relationship, like the penis goes here, this is okay,
Yeah.
like it'll come back. So I feel like it's more about, when we talk about like body image, it's really working through body image issues,
Mm.
Veronica, because again, we were masking that. Like I didn't care if I was, I had 20 extra pounds in my stomach because, I had 3 glasses of Pinot Grigio and I didn't care. Like I thought I was the hottest thing ever. But now sober and I've got that 20 pounds extra sitting there, I start to think about that a little bit more. And so that's what I see that women are doing. They really start to think about how I look, how I
Yeah.
perform. And so one of the first things I always tell them, turn the lights off if you have to. If you're so focused on that,
Mm.
turn the music on, something to distract your brain, because your brain is thinking about all the things that maybe it used to not think about when you've had a couple of shots of tequila or something. So what can you do differently? So I feel like the body image, and then it is about that desire level. I don't want sex. I don't want it anymore. My desire level is low. I just don't want it. What do I do? So I feel like that conversation is one that, we have to have. Is this because you're not drinking anymore? Is this because you're doing some really hard work on your inner self and you're answering some difficult questions? Is this because your partner's still drinking? And when he has been drinking,
Mm.
you don't like the smell of it, the taste of
Mm-hmm.
it. His sexual performance is declining because he's now drinking and he's not performing as well as he should be. So there are so many different facets to it. So I think it's not an easy cookie cutter, like, okay, then try this and then do that.
Mm.
It really is, what are some of these other things that is that triggering you, that you can smell, Coors Light on his breath when you kiss him, and that's triggering to you. So
Mm.
now you need to have a conversation with him, like, we will not have sex if you have been drinking. It's too hard for me.
Yeah, that comes up a lot. And again, in my
Yeah.
client group, especially when they do have a partner, the
Hmm.
drinks is that is one of the challenges. What happens as we age to our sex drive? Like, can you talk us through that?
Yeah. I mean, I think, for women as we go, we're entering perimenopause, menopause. And so there are, right now, we're starting to have those conversations more and more about how age affects our sex drive, right? What, Veronica, one of the things that I get concerned about is that when women get sober and they are in their 40s and they are in their 50s, not only are they sober, they removed this from their bodies, but they're also, you know, potentially in the stages of menopause. And
Mm.
so that in and of itself brings up an entirely new set of issues. It affects each one of us differently. So I could sit here and say, oh, your sex drive is going to diminish. But for some women, it actually increases because they feel like less pressure in their life. They're maybe trying some new hormone replacements, like whatever it might be. So it's really one of those times where you have to, as you're getting older, you have to talk to a medical professional about it, and whoever that medical professional is to you, and and get the blood work done. When I have a client, I had a couple of clients that would come to me like, oh, well, my sex drive has diminished and I'm 3 years sober and I don't want to do it anymore. And they were also in their mid 50s. And so what I encouraged them was, remove the alcohol piece for just a moment. Have you been to the doctor yet? Have you gotten a full chemical workup? Have you checked your hormone levels? No, no. Why would you? It's just because I don't drink anymore and I don't like them and I don't feel like, I feel like there's no connection and there's no spark anymore. But they hadn't done the medical side of things to be able to get that all checked out. Now let's get that clear, and then maybe we can have a different conversation. But I don't want to guide someone and say, go do this and go do that. But yet their hormones are super out of balance and they are in the throes of menopause, and that is
Right.
shifting things. So it's kind of, for someone who's, in sobriety in this like middle stage of life, I feel like there's, it is a kind of a complex issue And it's not just a black and white, like, oh, just do this and it will fix it all.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I just was thinking, my husband and my son are going to a football game at the weekend, and they're driving 6 hours. My son's 12, and I said to my husband, "This is the perfect opportunity to begin to have the talk." And we've talked a couple of things, and I gave him a book that he read in the summer. He was off school for some reason. I said, "This is a book about what's going to happen to your body because you're going to start going through puberty. I want you to just read it, and I want you to let me know if you have questions." And so he read it. And he was in the same room with me. He finished it, and I was like, do you have questions? Like, "Mom, I'm really glad I'm not a girl." Because one thing I have talked about with my son is about like periods, and that girls in his class are going to get periods, and it's really uncomfortable and painful, and we don't tease them, and we give them privacy and all that kind of stuff. But I'm just, my husband's like, "Oh, I don't know what to." My husband's got an older son who's like 38. I'm like, "Well, what did you say? You've got to talk about," and we've talked about consent from when they were very young, but I said, "You need to talk about porn. You need to talk about how that affects." I was reading somewhere that, oh God, it was either on a podcast, I can't remember what it was now. They're seeing erectile dysfunction in college-aged young men because of porn, how porn has changed in our culture in the last 20 years. I said, you need to talk to him about that and how it can change his neurochemistry and blah, 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 and consent, and you just need to talk about it.
Yeah.
And gosh, I'm just thinking, I think my mum gave me a book from the Catholic Church that basically laid out the mechanics. I think that and I think there was something at school about periods, but that was the rest of it you get from your mates.
Right.
It's such things have changed, but how would you as a culture like us to be talking about sex, as you're the sexpert?
Oh my gosh. Well, so I wouldn't have just a talk. Like I would really approach it as,
ongoing.
That's a lot of pressure for your husband too, like just to have to like, this is what it's going to be like. And if it becomes more naturally, that's what's to me is the ideal, but it doesn't. I know that I am unique and I am different. It comes to me naturally, but I still struggle talking to my kids are now 21 and 23, and I still struggled to talk to them. And I didn't have those conversations. I didn't talk to my son about porn, and I didn't talk to my daughter about porn. I didn't do any of that. Like it just, whether that's a fail or not, it's just, I didn't. And could I have done it differently? Absolutely. So I just think it's one of those conversations, just knowing that they can come to you at any time with anything, and removing that shame. For me, regardless of what the topic is, I'm sure, we could, even with this topic of alcohol, that's probably been, or my parenting, that has probably been a more difficult topic to talk about than sex with my kids, only because, I have to explain the family history. I have to explain this, grandmother died, great grandmother died, your mom now, has had issues with alcohol. So don't drink. Like, I can't do that. Like, that's just not how I'm going to approach it. So it was the same thing with sex. Like, I want them to be able to come to me and have a conversation, ask the questions if they choose to, and there won't be any harsh judgment. And so I've kind of created that from when they were little. Doesn't mean it's gone well every time, Veronica. Like, there have been some really difficult conversations and some situations that have been super tricky. And if you don't feel comfortable coming to me, find somebody else that you do. At my age, when you had those questions, you didn't have anybody to go to. Like you, I got a book. My mom didn't really talk to me that much about those kinds of things. And I entered, the human sexuality field in college. Like, what shifted for me? I don't know what happened, but I all of a sudden felt comfortable talking about it. So I think just allowing your kids just giving them that permission to come to you if something comes up without judgment, because that's what they fear. They fear that we're going to scold them.
Yeah. And that's, to be fair, what we're doing. We're just, as moments arrive, we got to start telling him about puberty and what's going to happen.
100%.
And I was saying to my husband, if you're 5 hours in the car side by side, there might be an opportunity to just drop in a little nonchalance about porn, and that because I have some very strong opinions about that, and the immeasurable damage it's doing to young people and to our culture as a
Yeah,
whole. And there's a lot of research and data that backs that up. And
for sure.
it's not about being prudish. It's about this over excess of images that are extreme and violent that young people can access.
For sure, Veronica. I hear you on that. I mean, and I absolutely agree with you. Like, and I think that you, by having a conversation with him about it, like, this is what we've observed. This is what the research says, although I know you have access to it. Like, I know that it's, whether we like it as parents or not, like, we're one Google question away
Yeah,
from seeing things and seeing these
yeah,
images, and they are bombarded with it, Veronica. They are
yeah.
bombarded with so much. So I commend you. I commend you for having that conversation, because again, I didn't do that. I don't know why I did it, but I wish I would have, but I didn't do that. So I appreciate that you're going to do that, and I think just kind of opening that up to see where it goes, because kids also define pornography different than adults do. We even adults define it a little bit differently. Like, some adults, I said to someone the other day, we were talking about a conversation about pornography, and like, well, I see it as erotica, and I'm like, okay, well, wait, I think we're talking about two different things. And sure enough, like, my definition of pornography and what I have researched and seen was completely different than what she was defining it as. She was talking about erotic novels
Yeah.
and self-guided things, like, it's beautiful, beautiful experiences, like these, images that she uses with her clients to, like, recommends them. And I'm like, oh, you can't be. And she's a professional. And so she had a different definition of pornography than I did. And
Yeah.
so, yes, I think kind of being clear on that as well.
Yeah, I'm just when we were at school, it was like Tiger Eyes got shared by everybody. Do you
Yes.
remember
Yes.
Judy Blume?
Yes. Oh my gosh, you know what I had to do? The church I was in at the time, I remember the youth group pastor asked my mom if he could borrow my brother and I to go into gas stations and ask to buy a Playboy magazine. And I think my brother was, I think the age to buy, I don't remember the time. I think the age to buy was like 18, and he was 16 and I was 13. I don't know why. I still don't know. I wish I could ask these questions now. They're like, why did you let us do that? But they were trying to, like, get places in trouble. And so my brother, I can't believe we did that. And we would go into these gas stations and my brother would ask to buy a Playboy. And if they got carded, they got in trouble. Or if they didn't get in trouble. But if they didn't get carded, they called the
It was like a
police.
sting operation.
It was a sting
Oh
at the
my
church. And I look back at that and like, what did that do to my head? Like, what
God.
was
Yeah.
I? What was it? But that was what I was taught about pornography. That thing behind the counter, that magazine is dirty and it's illegal and you're going to go to hell. And so that was the idea that I was brought up on, that was
Mm,
pornography.
mm.
So, and then when I started to learn, obviously being in this field and learning about erotica and how that's different than pornography. And, you've done the research, that there's such an evil, dark side to the pornography industry as well. And so
Yeah, I'm extremely
how can we shift it?
anti-porn. I'm really
Yeah.
anti-porn. I've read a lot of research, and it causes immeasurable harm. And human sexuality is healthy, and erotica can be really healthy. And we've had erotica through the centuries.
Yes.
It's the access to, yeah. Anyway,
Right.
that's probably a conversation for another day.
Yeah.
One of the best. Um, I was talking when my husband we were having this conversation. For me, the best advice on sex is in the Big Book of AA. And
And that is.
it says, nobody, and I'm paraphrasing, nobody can tell you what's right for you. Nobody can tell you that. That's up to you. And you just need to subject every encounter to two questions. Is this selfish? And does it hurt another person or not?
Mm,
And I just thought, I love that. That
yeah.
fits with my values. Right?
Yeah.
You're the only one who can decide what your sexuality is. And this is what you need to ask yourself. Is this hurting another person? And is it selfish? And, and if you go within that framework, that's probably a decent path to follow. What do you think?
AA was not my form of recovery, and so I had not heard that. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think the selfish piece. Sometimes I do. believe it's okay to be selfish, like to focus on ourselves, especially if we've been in a relationship where we've spent so much of our energy focusing on other people, especially if you're in an enabler or in codependent relationships. So I think selfish in that capacity, like again, it's how we define. Because I didn't go through any of the AA processes, I don't know like what that was referring to, but selfish, I'm like, sometimes I believe you do have to be selfish to take care of your own needs, but the harm for sure. Um, I really like to focus more on intimacy, Veronica. Like
Mm,
I think sex and recovery, it's so catchy. Like, my sober sexpert, like that's catchy to, it's catchy, right? But it's really about that intimate relationship. And so in one of Laura McCowan's books, she uses a definition that she had borrowed from someone. It's having a kind and compassionate witness to your truest thoughts and feelings. And
mm,
that's intimacy to me. And so
mm,
sometimes that's us. Our first intimate relationship, our primary is ourselves. And so what if we were the kind and compassionate witness to our truest thoughts and feelings? That's me. Like I want to be
mm,
that person for myself.
mm,
I also can have that with my partner. He and I, like he is my person for that. I also can have that with my best girlfriend. She is a kind and compassionate witness to my truest thoughts and feelings. So
mm,
it can be different people. It doesn't necessarily have to be a sexual relationship. And I really have found myself, you'd asked at the very beginning, like how I've seen this kind of shift for me professionally. I find I'm talking a little bit more about the intimacy piece of
mm,
relationships versus the nitty-gritty sex. I mean, again, like I can tell you how the body works and
mm,
where all the nerve endings are and touch here and don't do that and try this. And but what about if we just reframe that intimate connection? Because I feel like that is a lot of the underlying concept to our recovery journey. Like when
mm,
people come to us with these specific sex issues,
mm,
it boils down to intimacy. What are we doing? What are we afraid of? What is our past history with it? How do you want it to look? I'm very much a present and forward thinker. How do you want your intimate relationships to look? Do you need more close people in your circle, in your primary circle? What can you do about that? So I don't know. I really see that kind of shift to that intimacy focus as well.
mm. Well, this has been fascinating, Cindi. There's so many different things to talk about there. That's a whole subject in itself, intimacy. So thank you so much for bringing that in. Where can people find you?
Easiest way is Instagram. I am the sober sexpert on Instagram, and my website is Cindi Roberts, Cindy with an I. You can find me there as well. So those are the easiest ways.
And we will put all your information in
Perfect.
the show notes and everything. Thank you for a really frank and honest conversation. I know a lot of this comes up with a lot of my clients one to one, and I know that they'll be grateful to hear someone talk about the things that are on their minds, but they daren't say out loud. So
Thank you for inviting the topic because again, not everybody wants to have this conversation. So I appreciate that you invited me on to be able to have this because it is very important, especially for
yeah.
those in recovery.
Yeah, so please feel free to check out Cindi's work. She is the sober sexpert. She has credentials and decades of experience. So don't be fooled by any imposters there. Thanks for joining me, Cindi.
Thank you, Veronica.